Alright, let's begin this journey. Tonight, we're not just telling a story. We're time traveling into a world so brutally cold, so magnificently indifferent to your comfort, that you probably won't survive this. Seriously, you've heard the tales of Viking toughness before. The beards, the axes, the longboats, all that rugged charm. But none of it, absolutely none of it, compares to this one quiet, staggering detail that history often forgets to mention. They survived Arctic winters without fireplaces. Yeah, let that sink in. Go ahead and wrap your modern mind around that while you're snuggled under a blanket with the thermostat set to a comfortable 72. This is a cold that doesn't negotiate. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support means the world. Also, do me a favor and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to get a sense of who else is out there, maybe feeling a little bit of a chill themselves. Now, dim the lights around you. Maybe turn on a fan just for that soft background hum that helps you drift. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a long, slow sigh and a full-body shiver that seems to come from the very marrow of your bones. You've just stepped off the imaginary time travel platform, and you've landed right in the heart of the 9th century, standing in knee-deep, powdery snow somewhere near the Arctic Circle. The sky overhead is the color of cold, unforgiving iron. The wind, a relentless and invisible beast, is doing its absolute best to claw through every single layer you thought was enough to protect you. You're standing in a Viking settlement, but not the pillaging, raiding kind you see in the movies. No, this is the other side of the coin, the surviving kind. And your first realization is simple but utterly grim. This is a cold you don't argue with. It doesn't care about your feelings, your fingers, or your fading hopes. You glance around, your eyes stinging from the biting air. You see snow-blasted hills stretching silently into the distance, the delicate tracks of a reindeer etched into the fresh powder, and a small, shaggy herd of cattle huddled together like a cursed, breathing plush toy someone left out in the yard. A cluster of longhouses, partially buried in massive snowdrifts, sits low against the horizon. There's smoke rising from them, but it's barely there. Not the robust, confident plume of chimney smoke you're used to, but more like lazy, curling trails of gray snaking out from the eaves, as if even the fire inside is too tired to fight the oppressive cold. You expected hearths, maybe even grand, roaring fireplaces. There are none. Instead, the homes look low and wide, almost organic, like someone tried to build a house and ended up with a buried canoe instead. That's your destination. That's where you're headed. Welcome home. You stomp through the heavy snow toward one of the bigger longhouses, the crunch of your boots the only sound in the heavy silence. The doors are short, comically so. You have to crouch just to get inside, a design choice that is either charmingly rustic or spine-crushingly inconvenient, depending entirely on your mood right now. And let's be honest, your mood is leaning toward the latter. This is not what you were expecting, was it? Inside, it's dim, smoky, and surprisingly humid. That last part catches you off guard. It's warmer than outside, sure, but not by much. A weak, sulking fire crackles in a shallow, stone-lined pit in the middle of the packed earth floor. It's not blazing with defiant warmth. It's more like it's pouting, resigned to its fate. You get the distinct sense that this fire knows its role, and its role is to heat the soup, not the house. There's no chimney, just a small, dark hole in the thatched roof directly above the pit, letting the smoke meander out on its own lazy schedule. These moments linger longer than the years that follow. You take a deep breath and immediately regret it. The air tastes like wet wool, old meat, dense wood smoke, and at least 4 different kinds of unwashed sweat, all mingling in a thick, atmospheric stew. But this is survival, Viking style, and your modern, sanitized nose needs to get over itself. The room is long, really long, stretching into the lantern gold shadows. On either side are raised wooden platforms, covered in messy bundles of animal hides and thick furs. You spot people wrapped up like human burritos, muttering in Old Norse, their bodies pressed close together to share precious body heat. You also spot chickens, a scruffy-looking dog, and something you really hope is a goat. You find a spot near the fire pit, trying to coax some feeling back into your numb fingers. A gray-bearded Viking, who you'll later learn is named Stellan, slides a rough, handmade pottery cup of something hot and mysterious toward you. It smells deeply fermented and vaguely medicinal. He grunts in what you sincerely hope is a welcoming tone. This is not a place for small talk. This is a place for endurance. You quickly begin to realize that the trick here isn't about staying warm. That's a losing battle. The trick is about never, ever letting yourself get too cold in the first place. That's a whole different mentality, a revolutionary thinking born from necessity. You try to ask about fireplaces, gesturing vaguely upwards. Stellan just looks confused, as if you'd asked him why the snow doesn't grow up from the ground instead of falling down from the sky. Here's the deal, and you're starting to piece it together. Viking architecture isn't about maximizing heat, it's about minimizing loss. The walls of this longhouse are thick, sometimes 4 or 5 layers deep. It's a complex sandwich of wooden frames packed tight with turf, dried moss, and thick mud. It's nature's own insulation. This place is less a house and more a thermos. And that little fire pit, it's mostly for cooking and maybe a little ritual. The real warmth, the life-sustaining warmth, comes from the shared heat of bodies, the sealed, insulated space, and the countless layers of fur. As the sun dips, which it already kind of is, even though it's barely midday, you notice something else. There's no wasted movement here. People huddle close, conserving every calorie of energy. It's not just practical, it feels almost spiritual. These people have rituals, routines, and silent patterns that carry them through the long, crushing dark. This isn't just winter, it's a siege, and the enemy is the world itself. You'll pretend you didn't see that goat nibbling on someone's hair. Outside, the wind kicks up again, screaming past the sodded walls like a banshee. You step to the edge of the short door and peek out into the dim twilight. The world is a stark palette of blue, gray, and white, as if all the color has been drained from it. Your boots crunch against frozen straw scattered on the ground. There's a stillness here that feels almost sacred, or maybe just terrifying. Take your pick. Then, a moment of unexpected, haunting beauty. A woman begins to hum near the back of the longhouse. It's a lullaby, or maybe a prayer. You can't tell the difference. It's melodic and ancient, and it loops in your brain like a gentle spell. You sit back down near the fire, letting the smoke sting your eyes a little, and lean into the animal skin padding on the bench. You're not comfortable, not by any modern definition of the word, but you're warm enough, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make it through your first night. Here's your historical nugget for the evening. Archaeologists studying Norse settlements in Greenland and Iceland have confirmed that most Viking homes had these central hearths without chimneys, relying on roof holes or venting smoke directly through the turf walls. That meant warm floors but perpetually smoky air. It was functional, but probably terrible for your lungs. Now for the quirky twist. Some Viking settlements in Iceland showed signs of using geothermal steam, literal hot spring water, to heat their bathhouses. Yeah, you heard that right. Ancient hot tubs. Think of it as the Viking version of a spa day, minus the eucalyptus-infused towels and the soothing New Age music. But scholars still argue about this. Were Viking winters truly survivable for everyone? Or did only the strongest, or perhaps the most social, make it through? Was this a society that naturally selected for the well-adapted and the lucky? Or were there quiet, tragic winters full of loss that history just doesn't write about? You settle into your spot, your head spinning slightly from the thick smoke and the fermented drink Stellan gave you. You're not sure if you're tired or just being hypnotized by the crackling, sulking fire. But either way, your first Arctic night is beginning. You've got no chimney, no thermostat, and honestly, no idea how this is going to go. Nothing to worry about, probably. You wake up coughing. It's still dark, though this far north, darkness isn't just a nightly visitor. It's a permanent roommate that doesn't pay rent. You blink against the thick haze, trying to remember where you are. Oh, right. 9th century Viking longhouse. No chimney. A thick, greasy stew of smoke still clings low to the ceiling, rolling lazily like a slow-moving fog bank. Your throat feels like you've been gargling pine tar. You try to sit up and immediately smack your head on a low, soot-blackened beam overhead. Welcome back to the past. Around you, the longhouse has started to stir. It's early, but time here is more of a gentle suggestion than a rigid schedule. A young boy throws a handful of damp moss onto the smoldering embers in the fire pit. It flares briefly, then sizzles into a reluctant, smoky smolder. The embers groan in protest. People rise in their layers of wool and fur, shoulders hunched, eyes blurry with sleep. No one says much. The cold outside is a known enemy, and the warmth inside is a fragile, hard-won treaty at best. You're still thinking about the fireplace thing. Like, really, not one real fireplace. In all this frozen, beautiful desolation, it's not just about comfort. It's about survival. Your modern brain keeps searching for a hearth, a chimney, something with a roaring blaze where people might hang stockings or dry their socks. Instead, you get a fire pit that mostly smokes and sputters, and somehow, against all odds, this works. Survival teaches lessons money can't buy. You are a guest in the chieftain's longhouse, the biggest in the village. It belongs to Astrid, a woman with more fur than a bear and a stare sharp enough to gut a fish. She's already up, sipping something hot and bitter from a polished horn cup. She notices you shivering and gives a dry, knowing smirk. "Cold," she says, her voice raspy from the smoke. You just nod, not trusting your voice. She points a finger toward the ceiling. Smoke stays up, heat stays down. You stay alive. Then she walks away, as if she's just solved the theory of everything. And maybe, in this world, she has. You decide to look around, trying to understand how this place holds any heat at all, without a shred of modern design. You press your hand against the wall. It's solid, a mixture of heavy timber logs, packed tight with turf, straw, moss, and clay. The outside layer is frozen stiff, but the interior is slightly warmer to the touch, like a really, really determined sandwich. The thatched roof is sloped low and heavy with a thick layer of earth, designed less for elegance and more for not collapsing under the literal ton of snow that's currently sitting on it. Turns out these longhouses are more like buried boats than buildings. They have a low profile, they're wind-plecting, and they're built to retain every precious, fleeting calorie of warmth generated inside. The floors aren't wooden, they're packed dirt, sometimes lined with rough-hewn planks or thick layers of rushes. In the night, you could feel the faintest warmth rising up through them, maybe from the trapped body heat of the people and animals, or just from the insulating layer of animal skins spread across the sleeping platforms. You think about medieval castles with their cavernous stone halls and grand, drafty hearths, and realize those were luxuries of a different world. Out here, on the edge of everything, survival is about containment. It's about keeping the heat close, not wastefully chasing it up a chimney. Change sneaks in where no one notices. You watch as people go about their morning tasks with a quiet, practiced efficiency. Someone is milking a goat in the back corner, its bleats muffled by the general hum of the room. A boy is carefully scraping frost off a shield that hangs by the door. A woman hammers dried fish into flakes to add to a pot of whatever's boiling over the fire. Everything is close, tight, and incredibly efficient. You realize with a jolt that the idea of separate rooms is laughable here. There's no privacy, no designated bedrooms, no modern kitchen. There are just zones: the sleeping zone, the cooking zone, the goat zone, and all of it is designed to share every single drop of heat. You huddle near the fire pit again, and someone hands you a bowl. It's porridge mushi, warm and surprisingly filling. It has an earthy flavor you can't quite place, probably because it includes things like tree bark or lichen or something else your 21st century taste buds weren't designed to process. You eat it anyway. Everyone else is no one wastes energy chewing the fat, either literally or figuratively. They eat in silence, wrapped in their cloaks, steam rising from their bowls and nostrils in the dim glow. After breakfast, the door creaks open, and a blast of cold punches the room like a ghost with anger issues. Two men come in carrying firewood, their cheeks bright red and their beards frosted with ice crystals. The logs they drop by the fire aren't your standard picturesque hardwood either. These are scrawny birch branches, some moss-covered driftwood, and several bundles of dried peat. Peat is the key. Dug from bogs during the warmer months and left to dry, it burns slowly, smells a bit like dirty fused tea, and is way easier to store than giant tree trunks. Turns out, big, roaring wood fires are for people who don't live on the edge of nowhere. And here's the interesting bit you're starting to grasp. These fire pits aren't meant to heat the whole house. They're used to warm the central area, just enough, cook food, and maybe boil water. The real insulation strategy is you, your body heat, your proximity to other warm bodies, your stubborn refusal to die of exposure. You're not surviving because of a fireplace. You're surviving without one, by design. There's another layer to this, though. You notice it slowly as you move through the longhouse. The walls aren't perfectly straight. The layout isn't linear. Everything curves just a bit. The corners are softened. Turns out this is deliberate. Heat hates corners. It escapes, gets trapped, and dissipates. These structures are built to circulate warmth, not just contain it. It's kind of genius and totally counterintuitive if you're used to square houses and central heating. You also start to pick up on something else. The rhythm of life here is slow, not lazy, just deliberate. Everything is paced to conserve energy. You move less, you talk less, you even breathe less deeply when you're inside. Every single action is calculated to stretch the thin, precious layer of warmth over the long, bitter months ahead. Even in chaos, small routines keep you human. What seems impossible eventually becomes the new normal. Here's tonight's historical fact. While Viking homes lacked true fireplaces, they did have these central hearths that allowed for shared heating and cooking. The thick turf walls and the shared heat from animals were crucial, but so was ventilation. If done wrong, smoke inhalation could be just as deadly as the cold, which is why most longhouses had smoke holes in the roof or used angled rafters to direct the smoke up and out without letting all the heat follow it. Now for something quirky. Archaeologists have found fish bones embedded in the turf walls of some of these houses, possibly used for extra insulation, or maybe just leftovers getting weirdly repurposed. Either way, it seemed to work. Fish walls. Bet your house doesn't have those. And the scholarly debate continues. Some historians argue that these communal heating strategies reflect a deeply collective mindset, a culture built around the group rather than the individual. Others think they were simply pragmatic responses to harsh environmental constraints. Was it about culture, or was it just about the cold? Maybe it was both. Maybe that's the Viking secret. Embrace the suffering, make it communal, and then call it tradition. You rub your hands together over the sluggish, smoldering embers, and take another deep breath of that signature woods and goat perfume. The wind howls outside, dragging snow across the frozen earth like sandpaper. But in here, somehow, you're surviving. No fireplace required. You decide it's time to explore more than just the smoke-choked center of this grand survival experiment. You've made it through a night, maybe even started to acclimate, though your lungs are still staging a mild, smoky protest. The longhouse, as you've noticed, is both a womb and a prison. It's dark even in the middle of the day, low-ceilinged even when you're sitting down, and heavy in a way that makes you feel like you're walking through someone else's dimly lit memory. You're starting to understand why so many Norse myths happen in the firelight. There's something about this space that feels half real, half dream. The deeper you go into the longhouse, away from the central fire, the more obvious it becomes that this place wasn't built for comfort, but for sheer, stubborn durability. It's less a home in the modern sense, and more a life support system. The walls curve ever so slightly inward, as if the house itself is hunching its shoulders against the relentless cold. You pass rows of storage bins carved from whole logs, bundles of dried herbs strewn along the rafters, and racks of tools and weapons that all look like they could be used to either kill a bear or make a stew, depending on the mood. And then there's the smell, that deep, earthy musk of turf and timber, mingled with sweat, old meat, and wood smoke. It's a cloying but constant presence. And now, strangely, it's beginning to feel almost normal. It's as if your brain has filed it under background noise, along with the constant creaking of the timber groaning under the weight of the snow, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional, startling bleating of a goat. Now, here's the secret you've been stepping on this whole time, without even realizing it. The real genius of this place isn't the fire, it's the house itself. The Viking longhouse is basically a thermos wrapped in a dirt blanket. The outermost layer is sod-thick strips of grass-covered earth, cut from the ground and stacked like bricks over a timber skeleton. That turf isn't decorative. It's a high-performance insulation that works year-round. In the winter, it traps warmth. In the summer, it deflects heat. The Norse knew this, not from textbooks or engineering diagrams, but from sheer generational trial and error. Between the sod and the interior wood panels, there's a thick, chaotic mix of straw, animal hair, and sometimes even dried manure. That stuff fills all the gaps, blocks, drafts, and as a bonus, it smells faintly like survival. You're getting up close now, running your fingers along a beam crusted in years of black soot. You scrape a little bit of the grime away and see something etched beneath it, a carving. It's a rough, swirling spiral with runes circling the edge. This isn't just decorative, it feels protective. This house isn't just built for warmth, it's built for warding off whatever else might be waiting in the long, oppressive dark. The layout is also starting to make more sense. The longhouse is divided into zones, not by walls, but by purpose. The central fire pit is in the middle, flanked by those long sleeping platforms on either side. At one end, there's a storage area where dried fish, salted meat, and smoked cheese hang from the rafters like a strange, edible chandelier. At the other end, there's the livestock pen. You heard that right. Half the house is a barn. You finally peek into that end, and yep, there they are. Cows, sheep, and goats, all packed together like warm, snoring, hairy radiators. It's steamy back here, in a weirdly gross and comforting way. You step carefully between piles of straw and other ... stuff. One of the cows flicks an ear at you, completely unimpressed. Another is being milked by a teenage girl who doesn't even look up as she says, "Careful where you step." Loki likes to kick. You have no idea which of these animals is Loki, and you're not in the mood to find out the hard way. Here's the thing. This cohabitation isn't gross to them. It's essential. Animal heat, yep, literal body heat from livestock, is a critical part of the house's overall warmth equation. And in the dead of winter, when your own body feels like a half-charged phone battery, having a couple of warm cows in the next room makes a huge difference. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of central heating, if your heater occasionally sneezed hay in your direction. Catastrophe forces opportunity, and this innovative living arrangement is a perfect example. You wander back toward the center and sit near the edge of the raised platform where a few villagers are darning socks, sharpening blades, and repairing fishing nets. It's a little social zone, not lively exactly, but cooperative. People share tools, grumble about the snow levels, and pass around a horn of something fermented that hits your bloodstream like a hot brick. One of the old men, the same Stellan from your first night, leans toward you and croaks. You get used to it. The cold, the stink, the way you forget what color the sky is. You ask him how long he's lived in this house, and he just shrugs. My father built this one. Before him, my mother's brother. We fix the roof, patch the walls, but the bones stay the same. You're suddenly aware that this isn't just a house. It's an heirloom. It's a generational artifact that's still doing its job long after its builders became bones in the frozen ground. You press your hand to one of the beams again. You can feel the worn, smooth grooves where generations of hands have leaned, rested, and survived. Here's your historical fact. Archaeological digs in Norse Greenland have revealed longhouses that were over 20 meters long, with thick turf walls and shared animal shelters built right into the main structure. This wasn't rare. It was the standard design for harsh climates, and it worked. These homes could hold heat in temperatures that would freeze your eyelashes in seconds. Quirky detail of the day. Some of these homes had partial double walls, with gaps between the layers of turf and wood that were filled with straw, feathers, or even seaweed. Seaweed, it turns out that if it's dry and packed tight, it's a pretty effective insulator that's also kind of salty. Vikings, as it seems, were practical to the point of weird genius. Now, for the debate. Some scholars argue that these homes were masterpieces of environmental adaptation, rivaling even Roman designs in function, if not in form. Others insist that their success was more about behavioral adaptation, how people used the space, not just how it was built. Were the houses brilliant, or were the people just brilliant at surviving in them? You lie back on the furs and look up at the rafters, which are barely visible in the murky, dust-softened light. The house groans in the wind. Snow pelts the sod roof above you like tiny, insistent fists, but the cold doesn't reach you here. Not really. The house is doing its job, quietly, stubbornly, with all the charm of an old, creaky thermos that simply refuses to die. And as you lie there, you start to realize that's actually kind of beautiful. History isn't written in stone. It's written in footsteps like yours, across the damp earth of a longhouse floor. Morning rolls into midday with barely a noticeable shift in the light. Outside, the sky still hangs low like a heavy iron lid, and the wind sharpens its teeth against the sodded walls of the longhouse. You decide it's time to brave the cold. Not because you're some kind of hero, but because your body desperately needs to move. And frankly, you're starting to smell like smoked goat. So you bundle up like a human cabbage. Layer after itchy, coarse wool layer, then fur, and surprise, more wool. The process itself is absurd and time-consuming. First, a rough linen undertunic that feels like fine grit sandpaper against your skin. Then, thick wool trousers, a heavy tunic, another tunic on top of that, and a leather belt to hold it all down. Your feet disappear into high-drapped shoes that have been lined with hay. That's right, hay. You wiggle your toes and feel the dry straw crunch. For outerwear, you're handed a reindeer hide cloak that still smells distinctly and unapologetically like reindeer. There are no zippers, no Gore-Tex, just a series of leather ties, bone pins, and a healthy dose of hope. You finally emerge outside, dressed like someone who is actively trying to impersonate a snowdrift. The cold hits you instantly. It's not like a slap. It's more like the breath is silently sucked out of you by an invisible, indifferent force. Your eyelashes go stiff. Your nostrils freeze slightly every single time you inhale. And yet, you're not entirely miserable. You're insulated in the most literal and unglamorous sense of the word. Out here, in the pale, flat light, you can actually see how everyone else is dressed. And it's like a parade of slightly soggy woodland creatures. There are wool hats with ear flaps, mittens made from felted scraps, and some people wear hoods so big they look like they've borrowed them from a monk with serious neck problems. The colors are muted browns, grays, and off-whites, but here and there, a flash of dyed wool shows through. Deep reds and rich blues, rare and precious colors in this monochrome world. You follow the chieftain, Astrid, as she walks the perimeter of the settlement, checking on fences, the animals, and occasionally other humans who may or may not be pretending to work. She's dressed in a cloak so massive it trails behind her in the snow like a royal cape. "You're learning," she says, without turning, nodding at your ridiculous, puffy ensemble. You look less like a ghost. You pass a group of children chasing each other through the snow, bundled into so many layers they resemble angry, mobile marshmallows. Their laughter cuts through the wind like birdsong. One of them slips and lands face first in a drift, then pops back up, laughing, with a chunk of ice stuck to his eyebrow. Apparently, that counts as fun here. Astrid stops by one of the smaller houses. This one houses 2 families and their goats. She gestures at the sod-packed roof and grunts. "Good layers, good roof, bad layers, cold roof." Then she points to your cloak. "Reindeer's warm. Don't let it get wet." Wet means death. It's not a metaphor. It's the law of the land. You help her haul some firewood, though wood is a generous term. Most of what you're carrying is gnarled driftwood and blocks of dried peat, both of which feel as light as frozen bread, but burn long and hot. You pass a stack of something strange, blocks of frozen moss and dried dung that have been pressed into tight, neat bundles. It's fuel. You can't help but make a face. Astrid smirks. You think fire cares what it eats. You trudge back toward the main longhouse, and she pauses by a sled. It's a crude thing, made of wood, lashed together with hide, with polished animal bones for runners. But it's clever. A few sealskins are bundled on top, stitched with waterproof seams made from sinew, for trading, she says, or when we move. The idea of moving anywhere in this frozen, silent void seems ludicrous. But she says it like moving is as normal as brushing your teeth. You're starting to realize that for all the heavy, rooted weight of their world, these people are weirdly mobile. They are nomadic when they need to be, rooted when they must be, and adaptable to a fault. You ask how they stay warm without any modern materials. Astrid just shrugs. "We use everything. Wool from the sheep, fur from the fox, leather from the cow, even bird skin if it's soft." She chuckles at your wide-eyed look. You want to stay warm. Put a gull on your head. As the wind picks up, you realize the key isn't just the clothing itself. It's the strategy behind it. Vikings didn't layer randomly. They used air pockets, trapping heat with loose wool while blocking wind with tight leather. The cloaks created a personal heat bubble around them. You, meanwhile, are sweating like a liar in court and simultaneously freezing through your knees. You've got the gear, but you don't have the wisdom yet. Back inside, you begin stripping off your layers with the careful dread of someone who knows they'll have to put them all back on again later. The re-entry into the smoky warmth of the longhouse feels like crawling into a low-budget sauna. Someone hands you a bowl of hot broth, and the steam fogs your eyebrows. It tastes like fish and desperation, but it's warm, and right now, that's enough. Historical fact-check time. Vikings were absolute masters of wool. They bred sheep specifically for dense, warm fleece, and their textiles included a coarse, naturally water-resistant outer layer called vadmel*, which was so valuable it doubled as currency in some regions. They also felted wool, literally pounding and matting it until it thickened, to make garments that were both flexible and nearly windproof. This wasn't just clothing, it was revolutionary thinking in textile technology. Quirky fact for you: Vikings sometimes lined their boots with dried grass or hay to add extra insulation and wick away moisture. Think of it as a prehistoric version of Dr. Scholl's inserts. Some even stuffed their sleeves with moss. It wasn't exactly stylish, But if you've ever been snowed in with soggy socks, you'll understand the sheer genius of it. And now, for the debate. Some scholars argue that Vikings didn't suffer much from the cold due to their incredible clothing, technology, and physical adaptation. Others suggest that we romanticize it, and that hypothermia and frostbite were common, unrecorded facts of daily life. The truth likely lives somewhere in the margins. Some people adapted, some didn't, and the cold, as you're learning, doesn't give out participation trophies. You stretch out on a fur mat, feeling the weight of the day settle deep in your limbs. Outside, the wind growls like a hungry animal, but inside, you're wrapped in wool and reindeer hide, feeling a kind of reluctant, grudging respect for the people who made all of this work. You still smell like a goat. You still can't breathe properly through your smoke-cattled sinuses, but you're warm, for now. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake up sandwiched between two very warm, very snoring bodies. One of them is human, the other is a goat. The human, a middle-aged woman with wild gray hair and a bear-like snore, is dead to the world, curled under a thick fur that smells like old cheese and pine needles. The goat, meanwhile, is wide awake and staring at you with its weird, rectangular pupils, like it knows something about your soul that you don't. You're not sure which is more unsettling. This isn't exactly your idea of cozy, but as your toes wiggle in their haste-stuffed shoes and your fingers flex without that brittle, frost-bitten feeling, you get it. Body heat isn't just a byproduct of survival here. It's a resource. It's a form of currency. And in this longhouse, warmth isn't private property. It's communal. You either share it or you freeze. There is no third option. Across the room, in the dim glow of the smoldering embers, another bundle of humans is beginning to stir. A boy kicks off his blanket and rubs the sleep from his eyes with his mitten-clad fists. A woman reaches over and gently adjusts a fur cloak over a toddler, tucking it snugly around his ears. A dog stretches and shakes out its shaggy coat, scattering a small flurry of dried hay and dust into the air. The longhouse isn't quiet, exactly, but its noises are low, muffled, and strangely intimate. You've never heard a group of people wake up in unison before. It's oddly comforting. Your own personal space bubble, something you took for granted back in your world, is now completely gone, vanished, eviscerated. You're breathing the same smoky air as 20 other people and several farm animals. You're sleeping shoulder, shoulder, hip to hip. Someone's foot is pressed against your leg, and it's not even weird anymore. In the Arctic winter, personal space is a luxury you give up if you want to see the spring. There's a rhythm to it, too. People seem to switch positions during the night, a kind of choreographed tangle of limbs and furs. Some sleep closer to the fire, some at the back, depending on their health age or even their social standing. The elders, who are sources of both wisdom and heat, usually get the prime spots near the embers. Children are tucked between adults, like living, breathing heating pads. Infants sometimes sleep directly on the warmest parts of their mothers, wrapped in a fur that's been pre-warmed by someone's lap. You try to sit up and immediately regret it. The air up here, just a foot higher, is colder, and the smoke is thicker. It's like the difference between swimming underwater and standing in a steam room. You lie back down. That thin 6-inch difference is the barrier between being reasonably warm and actively questioning all of your life choices. Stellan, the gray-bearded man from your first night, gives you a knowing look from across the room. Still alive, he grunts. You nod, coughing slightly. He smiles, a rare event that cracks the weathered lines in his wind-burned face. Then you slept right. You didn't just sleep right. You slept like a person half dead with exhaustion, wrapped in a pile of other half-dead people who were all pretending the night wasn't actively trying to kill them. This is more than survival. It's a strategy. It's the Viking version of a sleepover, where hypothermia is the uninvited guest you all collectively ignore. And not everyone sleeps on furs. In the poorer longhouses, people just sleep directly on piles of hay or straw, maybe with a single coarse wool blanket if they're lucky. The fire rarely reaches the far ends of the longhouse, so those who sleep there depend almost entirely on the warmth of others. You think about that the next time you complain about cold sheets. Here's the thing that modern life doesn't prepare you for. Humans are heat-generating machines. A single adult gives off enough heat to raise the temperature of a small, enclosed space by a few degrees. Now, multiply that by 20 people and 5 goats, and suddenly the longhouse becomes something more than a shelter. It becomes a slow cooker. Everyone just simmers together all winter long. It's weird. It's a little gross, but it's also undeniably genius. You help with the morning cleanup, brushing loose hay off the sleeping platform and shaking out the furs near the fire. Someone tosses more peat onto the embers, and the flames crackle back to life with a small, collective cheer from your aching joints. The smoke rises, hits the low thatched roof, and spreads outward like a lazy, gray cloud. A few people cough. This is nothing new. Their lungs have been marinating in this stuff since birth. As the longhouse fills with motion, you notice the unspoken rules of proximity. No one sleeps alone unless they're sick. No one sleeps with anyone else unless it's agreed upon beforehand. Kids cuddle with their parents, their siblings, even their neighbors. It's less about relationships and more about thermodynamics. And as you notice a baby nestled snugly between an old man and a young girl, you realize this is how humanity used to survive, not by comfort, but by community. Historical timeout. Studies of Viking-era settlements consistently show architectural designs that prioritize centralized heating and communal sleeping arrangements. Even in large, wealthy households, the sleeping quarters were shared spaces. Fewer walls meant less heat loss. This wasn't just practical, it was cultural. Norse society revolved around the group, the clan, not the individual. The idea of a private bedroom would have seemed incredibly strange and wasteful. Now, for your fringe fact, in some parts of medieval Scandinavia, winter weddings were scheduled not for romance, but for warmth, literally. More people packed into one longhouse meant a warmer space for everyone. So yes, it's entirely possible that your Viking wedding night included the bride, the groom, and Aunt Sigrid snoring 3 feet away. And tonight's scholarly debate, some scholars argue that the communal sleeping model was a stark necessity born of a harsh climate. Others think it reflected a deeper social cohesion, one where privacy was simply less valued than interdependence and mutual support. Either way, it's clear that for the Vikings, warmth wasn't a personal achievement. It was a shared responsibility. You finish shaking out a heavy reindeer pelt and drape it back onto the platform. The fire glows faintly, casting flickering lantern gold shadows across the beams overhead. Someone starts humming a low, ancient tune while stirring a pot of morning porridge, and another person cracks open a small barrel of dried apples. The longhouse breathes like a single living organism, smoky and unbelievably stubborn. Outside, the sky is still the color of iron gray. You pull your cloak tighter and look around at the sleepy faces, the steaming bowls, the goats chewing contentedly by the door. It hits you then, quietly but clearly. In a place where the cold kills without warning, survival isn't about how strong you are. It's about how close you're willing to get to the people and maybe the goat around you. The next time you step outside, it's mostly because your eyes are starting to sting from the permanent cloud of smoke that hangs inside the longhouse. Your cloak is damp from your own breathing, and your inner layers smell like boiled wool and last night's fish stew. But as you crack open the longhouse door, and the outside air rushes in sharp, dry, almost surgically, immediately question your decision. It's not just cold, it's mythological. It's the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache even when you're not smiling, which you're definitely not. But as your boots crunch down onto the snow-packed earth, you realize something else. Silence. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that sounds like everything around you is holding its breath. There's no birdsong, no rustling of trees in the wind. Even the wind itself is subdued, sneaking low along the ground, like it's afraid to make a scene. You walk the perimeter of the settlement again, tracing your steps from earlier. But now, instead of just observing the snow-covered roofs and the fur-draped fences, you're noticing how every single structure is playing a part in this elaborate game of survival. It's like someone designed this entire place with a single command: don't let the heat escape. You stop in front of a small, rounded outbuilding. It looks like a buried beehive. One of the villagers sees you staring and walks over. Her name is Inga, and her nose is red enough to suggest she's been outside for far too long. "Storage hut," she says, her voice muffled by her cloak. "Built like a womb. Warm inside." She beckons, and you duck through a squat entrance that's been dug directly into the snowbank. Inside, you're hit with the rich smell of old grain, dried meat, and something tangy that might be fermented turnips. It's small, barely taller than you are, round and completely encased in thick turf. There are no corners, just a tight, circular shape meant to trap warmth like a cup holding steam. The walls are packed with snow on the outside, but lined with straw and hide on the inside, creating a thick, crude insulation that somehow works better than you'd expect. "We sleep here sometimes," Inga mutters, pointing to a mat of hay and animal skins. "When the wind's bad or the roof leaks, you glance up. There's no fire pit, no heat source at all, just the trapped warmth lingering from a body that might have left hours ago. It's astonishing. This isn't just a storeroom. It's a pressure-sealed panic room made from dirt and instinct." You duck back outside and notice something else you missed before. Every structure in the village, from the longhouses to the latrines, is dug partially into the ground. At first glance, it looks like poor, sunken construction, but now you understand it's incredibly smart. The earth holds heat if you build low. If you build half-buried, the ground itself helps to shield you from the biting cold. Above ground is a freezer. Below ground is a blanket. Back at the main longhouse, you wander around the exterior. You run your hand along the turf-covered wall. It's frozen solid and stiff on the outside, but dry underneath. This turf has been harvested, cured, and stacked with the care of a master bricklayer. Whole families spend their summers cutting and curing these thick chunks of earth to use for building and repairs during the winter. You've never seen dirt treated with such reverence. You duck into a nearby shed where a man named Katil is repairing a set of skis made from curved ash wood. He's hunched over the bindings, using sinew like thread, his fingers red but steady. "These will get me to the fjord," he says, without looking up. "Even if the world freezes." You laugh, but Katil doesn't. He means it. These skis aren't for recreation. They're a vital mode of transport. If you want food in the winter, you don't wait for it to walk into your longhouse. You go out and get it. And if you're going to go get it through snow that can swallow a man whole, you need skis, sleds, and an intimate knowledge of a terrain that's half frozen and half forgotten. Katil nods toward the main longhouse again. "The walls are good, but you only stay inside them if you have enough food and wood and water that isn't ice." He says this like it's all painfully obvious, and to him it is. This is when you realize the longhouse doesn't survive the winter. The people survive the winter, and they drag the longhouse along with them. The structure is a container. It's a tool. It holds their effort, their work, their collective warmth, but it doesn't make the warmth. That's their job. Every log, every animal pelt, every armful of moss has to be collected, hauled, and managed. There's no set it and forget it here. This isn't central heating. This is central suffering on a very tight schedule. Historical fact for your frostbitten brain. The technique of using earth as insulation, covering buildings with sod, was a deliberate architectural practice used across the entire Norse world. Icelandic turf houses, for example, could maintain interior temperatures above freezing even in sub-zero conditions, despite having no chimneys or masonry fireplaces. The effectiveness of these structures wasn't magic, it was layers. Always, always layers. And a quirky detail for you. Some Viking homes were built with removable wall panels that allowed access to storage spaces built directly within the walls themselves. That's right, secret meat compartments. Because when winter hits, nothing says prepared like having a hidden stash of dried cod tucked away behind your bedroom wall. And the ongoing debate, modern historians argue over whether these brilliant building techniques were born from desperate adaptation or were inherited knowledge from earlier European traditions. Did the Norse invent the turf house out of sheer necessity, or was it just a refinement of something even older? Either way, they took it farther than most and survived long after other frontier societies had vanished. As you step back inside the longhouse, snow melting in clumps off your boots, you suddenly feel it in your bones. Not just the warmth, but the intentionality of it. Every surface, every beam, every hay-stuffed shoe and fish-stuffed wall exists to trap that precious warmth. Keep it moving, and make sure it doesn't escape until the sun finally decides to come back. And now you're beginning to get it. The Norse didn't build fireplaces because they didn't need to. They were the fire. The house was the ember, and the entire village was the flame, tucked carefully against the wind. You don't need a clock to know when dinner's coming. Your stomach tells you first. The smell of roasting meat tells you second. And third, the longhouse slowly shifts into a quiet ritual of preparation. It's not loud or hurried, just deliberate. You're getting used to this rhythm now, this slow choreography of survival, where every single action means something, even if that something is just, don't freeze. A low fire smolders in the central pit, and you notice it's finally pulling its weight tonight. The air is not exactly clear, but it's breathable, which feels like a major win. Still, there's no chimney, just that same squat little smoke hole carved into the roof. The smoke drifts up in ghostly ribbons, hits the rafters, then either escapes or settles back down to sting your eyes like a passive-aggressive roommate. You sit near the fire, alongside a few others, Stellan, Inga. A couple of small kids who've been chewing on strips of dried something or other for the last hour and watch as a pot is lowered onto the coals. It's a stew, you think, or a soup, or possibly both, and also neither. The scent is meaty, but not in a way you can immediately identify. There's a note of fish, a note of some kind of root vegetable, and something vaguely gamey, like boiled squirrel with ambition. You ask what's in it. No one answers. That's the first warning sign. A teenage boy eventually grins and offers you a bite of something that's been roasted on a stick. It's dark, crispy, and smells smoky with a hint of salt. You take it, you bite, you chew. It's chewy, really, really chewy, like rubberized bacon, but with a faint hint of guilt. You manage to get it down and nod politely, even though your taste buds are currently filing a formal complaint with your brain. Seal, the boy says. Tough, good in winter. Then he shrugs and eats a much larger piece without even blinking. You've never been more aware of how spoiled your modern palate is. But calories are calories, and out here, calories mean survival. They don't cook for taste. They cook for heat, for energy, for endurance. And that means meat, any meat. It gets dried, smoked, boiled, fermented, or sometimes all of the above. You spot someone tossing a hunk of peat into the fire to keep it going. You also notice that the fire pit itself is no bigger than a small end table. It sits right in the middle of the floor, surrounded by flat stones. No chimney, no metal stove, no elaborate setup, just rocks, a pit, and a fire. You've seen bigger birthday cakes, and yet this little fire does it all. It heats the stew, warms the air, dries out the socks, and occasionally smokes out an unlucky squirrel that was living in the thatch. It's stubborn, finicky, and absolutely essential. But let's be real, it's not doing a great job of warming the whole house. Not really. At best, it keeps the worst of the biting cold at bay. That's it. There are no toasty evenings spent by the fire here. There's just one more thing standing between you and frostbite. You've been wondering why they never just built better fires, bigger fires. Why not a proper stone hearth, a chimney, something more efficient? You ask Stellan, who gives you the same look your grandfather gave you when you asked why his TV still had buttons. Chimneys let the heat out, he says, his voice a low rumble. Smoke goes out, heat follows. He gestures upward, where the smoke is curling lazily toward the dark, soot-streaked beams. Better to choke a little than to freeze a lot. Turns out they weren't ignorant. They knew how to build chimneys. The Romans had them. Other Europeans had them. But the Norse, out here on the frozen edge of the world, they made a choice. They didn't want to let all that hard-earned heat escape, just to make the air a little easier on the lungs. You sit with that for a moment, blinking through the haze, and realize just how different the survival math is here. They didn't build for comfort. They built for conservation. You look around the room and notice something else. The rafters are black, not dark brown, but pitch black. Centuries of smoke have coated the beams in a layer of soot so thick it looks like black velvet. It absorbs the dim light. It eats the shadows. It's both beautiful and terrifying all at once. You wonder how much of it you've inhaled already. Probably enough to qualify as a chimney yourself. A few minutes later, Inga hands you a bowl of the stew. You brace yourself. It's hot, salty, and vaguely fishy. There's a root vegetable in it that tastes like a turnip, and something stringy that might be dried lamb. You eat it all quickly, because the warmth it provides is far more important than the taste. Historical fact for the evening. Viking homes didn't have traditional fireplaces. Instead, they relied on these open central hearths without chimneys, venting the smoke through smoke holes or cracks in the roof. The result was smoky, yes, but also incredibly effective from a heat loss perspective. The fires were kept low and slow, minimizing heat loss while still allowing for cooking and a small pocket of comfort. And here's your quirky twist. Those soot-covered beams weren't just an unfortunate side effect. In some Norse cultures, the soot was actually harvested. It was scraped down, mixed with animal fat, and used as a dark pigment for writing or painting. So, yes, that ceiling grime could very well end up on a runestone near you. Tonight's debate: some scholars argue that the chimneyless homes weren't a deliberate design choice, but rather a result of a lack of resources or advanced masonry knowledge. Others say it was completely intentionally low-tech high-survival solution, perfectly tailored to extreme conditions. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle. Innovation, after all, doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like a smoky hut with a fire the size of a pizza. As dinner wraps up, the longhouse settles into that sleepy, low murmur again. The fire dims. The bowls are rinsed with melted snow. People begin to crawl back into their fur piles, choosing warmth over everything else. You follow suit, stretching out near the same goat from last night, who is now firmly convinced that you belong to it. As the last embers pop in the fire pit and the smoke drifts lazily up into the rafters, you exhale, long and slow. It still burns your lungs a little, but not as much as it did before. You're adapting, slowly, smokily, one soot-filled breath at a time. You wake again, this time not to a sound or a movement, but to the total and utter absence of light, pitch, absolute black. Your brain spins for a second, trying to recalibrate. Is it still night? Is it morning? Is it evening again? You blink and wave a hand in front of your face. Nothing. It's not just dark inside the longhouse. It's as if the entire concept of light has gone on a long vacation. Welcome to a Viking winter. Daylight hours, approximately 4 of them, if you're lucky. And when the sun does decide to rise, it barely clears the horizon before changing its mind and sliding back down again like a nervous turtle peeking out of its shell. You grope around for your cloak, trying not to kick someone in the ribs. The longhouse has begun to stir, but no one is in a hurry, because why would they be? The distinction between day and night is mostly imaginary this time of year. The sun might make a brief, apologetic appearance around midday, yawning dimly over the treetops before vanishing again, but mostly it's just twilight. All day, every day. You finally shuffle toward the door and peek outside. The cold hits you first, then the blue. The entire world is painted in shades of blue-ish gray, the snow, the sky, the wood of the fences, even the breath puffing out from your own nose. The light is diffused, dreamlike, as though someone has dimmed the entire planet. And still, the village is alive. A few figures trudge through the snow, hauling peat or firewood. Others are tending to the animals, shoveling frozen waste into neat piles. Life doesn't pause just because the sun can't be bothered to show up for work. You step fully outside and stare up at the sky. There's no real sunrise, just a gradual undarkening, a sort of apology from the heavens that says, "This is the best I can do right now." Inga joins you, tugging her wool hood tighter around her face. "Too dark?" she asks, though it's less a question and more of a shared, weary complaint. You nod, and she grunts. "Gets better." in 3 or 4 months. Then she trudges off, as cheerful as someone with frost actively forming on their eyelashes can be. Inside the longhouse again, the dimness feels even heavier. Candles are rare, a luxury reserved for important moments or rituals. Most of the light comes from the central fire pit, which isn't exactly doing the Lord's work in the illumination department. You notice people working near the walls, squinting as they sew, mend, or carve by a firelight that throws more shadow than glow. You think about how sunlight affects you in your modern life. When it gets dark too early, you get sluggish, irritable, maybe even a little depressed. You suddenly understand why everyone here seems so calm, so inward-facing. There's no manic drive to get things done while the sun is out, because the sun *ISN single quotes 2 *out. So, you adapt, you slow down, you find other ways to mark the passage of time. And yet, they do have their ways. You find Stellan sitting near the back of the longhouse, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. You ask him how they tell time. "We feel it," he says, not looking up. You raise an eyebrow, and he finally grins. Not like you. No ticking, just feel. When the goats need feeding, when the firewood runs low, when the stew is done, the world tells you. You try to imagine a life without hours, without clocks, just the vague, internal sense that morning is when it gets slightly less black, evening is when the goats get twitchy, and bedtime is when your body finally gives up. It's a completely different kind of time, a human kind of time. You spend part of the day outside, helping Katil repair a storage fence. The light doesn't change. The wind picks up now and then, and snow hisses across the ground like whispering ghosts. You feel completely untethered. There's no sun to orient yourself, no shadows to track, just that same blue-gray blanket draped over everything, like a stage lit for a dream. Back inside, a few children are playing near the fire. Their toys are simple, carved wooden animals, dice made from bone, a ball of stitched-together hide. No one is keeping time. No one is telling them when to stop. There's no, "Okay, it's 3:30, time for a snack." The longhouse is like a cave, filled with a low, continuous hum of life. People sleep, wake, eat, and repeat. They aren't waiting for the light to return. In a way, they are the light. Here's your historical fact. In Viking-era Scandinavia, especially in the far north, daylight during the winter could shrink to just a few hours a day. In places like northern Norway or Iceland, the sun might not rise at all for weeks on end. Yet these communities thrived. They adapted their daily rhythms to a life without sunlight, focusing on indoor tasks, community bonding, and sheer mental endurance. And the quirky detail: some Viking farmers used hollowed-out sheep bladders filled with fish oil as makeshift lanterns. A floating wick in the oil gave off a weak but steady flame. So, yes, they lit their homes with glowing sacks of animal parts. The ambience must have been incredible. Now, for the scholarly debate: did the Vikings suffer from what we now call seasonal affective disorder? Some researchers believe they may have been biologically better adapted to long periods of darkness, possibly due to genetic traits favoring melatonin regulation. Others argue they simply developed robust cultural coping strategies, like communal gatherings, storytelling, and intense winter rituals to keep their spirits lit when the sun wouldn't. You settle back into your fur pile near the hearth, your eyes struggling to stay open, even though your body feels rested. The dimness is like a sedative. wrapping you in a heavy, gray fog that seeps deep into your bones. You've been here long enough now to really feel it. Not just the cold, but the darkness, the way it presses, in the way it quiets the world, muffling ambition and muting anxiety. And yet, somehow, no one here seems panicked. No one complains that it's still dark. They just live through it. They sit beside each other, stir the stew, feed the goats, and sew another patch into the knees of the same wooled trousers. They were not fighting the dark. They were living inside it. As you close your eyes again, listening to the faint rustle of furs, the pop of the fire, and the murmur of voices, low and soft, it finally makes sense. The light isn't gone. It's just moved inward. You don't go outside the next day, not because you're tired, though you are, but because today is food day. Not cooking food, but finding food. You're not hunting or fishing, thankfully. Instead, you're allowed to witness one of the most sacred and critical parts of Arctic Viking survival, the pantry. Now, let's get one thing clear up front. When you hear the word pantry, you might picture tidy shelves of dry goods, quaint baskets of onions, maybe a mason jar of lentils you forgot you owned back in 2019. That is not what's happening here. The Viking winter pantry is not neat. It's not cute. It's not even fully indoors. It's mostly a collection of pits, hooks, crates, and really, really cold holes in the earth where meat doesn't rot. It just freezes into submission. Inga is the one who shows you. She pulls on a thick seal-hide coat and trudges with you out behind the longhouse, through knee-high snow, and past a row of wind-carved fence posts until you reach what looks like a small, buried shrine. It's not decorated or ceremonial, just a low wooden structure barely poking out of the ground. With a roof so covered in snow, you nearly miss it. She knocks on it once, like it's a neighbor's front door, then lifts a heavy wooden latch and opens it. A wave of cold air whooshes up from below, somehow even colder than the already freezing landscape. Inside, there's a sunken hole, maybe 5 feet down, lined with stones, and packed tight with layers of snow, sawdust, and straw. She climbs halfway in and pulls out a frozen hunk of something unidentifiable and solid enough to cause blunt force trauma. "Reindeer shoulder," she says proudly, tossing it into a sack like it's a block of wood. You ask if they have to hunt for this every few days, and she laughs, a sound that comes out as a puff of white vapor. Hunt in winter. No, we eat what we caught before winter, and suddenly it clicks. This isn't just storage, it's strategy. What you catch, grow, smoke, salt, and dry in the warmer months becomes your literal lifeline when the snow walls you in. If you didn't prepare properly, you don't just go hungry. You disappear. The next cache she shows you is behind a small barn, hidden under a thick layer of straw and heavy stones. She kicks the covering aside and pries up a heavy wooden plank. Beneath it is another frozen pit. This one is lined with birch bark and filled with long, thin fish that have been wrapped in bundles of moss. They look vaguely like mummified eels. Cod, she says. We catch and dry it by the fjord. Keeps all winter. You pick one up, and it's so light it feels hollow. It's like fish jerky, like edible driftwood. Apparently, you rehydrate it by boiling it into a soup, or you just chew on it until it becomes something that vaguely resembles food. Back in the longhouse, the morning fire is already burning, and a few of the women are unwrapping frozen meat with their bare hands like it's no big deal. Someone tosses what looks like a piece of frozen lung into a bubbling pot. A child gnaws on a dried apple, while another carefully licks a piece of ice hanging from a roof beam. You realize that food isn't just sustenance here. It's a form of time travel, a direct link to the better, warmer months. You think about modern refrigeration, the constant, low hum of a machine, the light that flicks on when you open the door. Here, the fridge is the earth itself. The freezer is the air. There are no buttons, no backup plan, just physics and trust. Here's something even more surprising. They've stored vegetables, too. Root crops, like turnips and onions, are buried in straw-lined boxes inside the house, tucked into corners like sleepy animals. They're dry and slowly softening with the passage of time, but they're still edible. Every single onion is a small miracle. Every turnip is a stored ray of summer sunlight. And then you spot something strange, a stone jar, sealed with what looks like leather and wax. Someone notices you eyeing it and grins. "Pickled sheep's testicles," he says, and then adds, completely dead serious, "very sour." You back away slowly. Now, here's the historical fact for you to wrap your head around. Vikings had remarkably sophisticated food preservation techniques. They used salt, smoke, drying, burying, fermenting, and even pickling to ensure they didn't starve during the long winter months. In Iceland, some of these underground storage pits, or holler, could keep food preserved for years. The Earth's natural, consistent cold made it possible. There was no need for ice boxes or electricity. The fringe fact. In Greenland, some Norse settlers reportedly stored food in pits that were shared communally. Imagine burying a ham in the ground and having to trust your neighbor not to dig it up. That's how tight-knit, or perhaps how desperate, some of these settlements were. A group pit, equal parts refrigerator and trust exercise. And tonight's scholarly debate, some experts believe that Norse food preservation was a patchwork of local innovation and techniques borrowed from other European societies they encountered through trade and raiding. Others argue that it developed independently out of sheer environmental necessity. Either way, it's clear the Vikings didn't just survive the winter. They prepared for it with a chilling and sometimes sour efficiency. As the stew simmers over the fire, you catch a whiff of something shockingly fragrant. Herbs, spices. No, just some wild onion and dried lichen from a nearby sack. Still, the scent is borderline luxurious after the last few nights of salt and fish-flavored everything. Dinner is served in silence, save for a few murmurs and grunts of approval. It's good, not just edible good, but genuinely warming. A broth that slides down your throat and lights a tiny welcome fire in your belly. You lean back against the wall, your hands wrapped around the warm, rough pottery bowl, and feel, for the first time, almost full, not just in your stomach, but in your chest, like you've borrowed a little bit of their pride, their hard-won resilience. The snow outside keeps falling. The darkness thickens like a second layer of skin. But tonight, the fire burns a little brighter, the stew tastes a little better, and the longhouse hums with the quiet, contented sound of people who have learned how to survive, not by fighting winter, but by feeding themselves enough to face it again tomorrow. It's late when they offer you the shark. You've already eaten, already sat through a surprisingly enjoyable meal of stewed reindeer with a hint of something vaguely green and edible. You were considering crawling back under your furs and pretending you didn't exist for the next 12 hours. But then Stellan appears in front of you, holding out a small wooden dish, and says with a perfectly straight face, "Try this." special. You look down and immediately wish you hadn't. On the dish are a few cubes of meat, grayish, damp-looking, and glistening slightly, like they've been sweating out their own bad opinions. The smell hits you a moment later. It's sharp, acidic, and somehow both fishy and chemical at the same time. Like ammonia met a low tide, and they decided to get experimental. You look up at Stellan. He's smiling. That alone is a bad sign. Inga is across the fire, grinning. Hakarl, she says, like she's naming a beloved uncle. Fermented shark. Very strong, very healthy. You glance around the room, expecting someone to shout, "Just kidding," but no one does. This is not a prank. This is a delicacy. You pick up one of the cubes between your fingers and bring it closer to your mouth, and the smell gets exponentially worse. You hesitate. Someone starts a slow clap. You're not sure if it's supportive or just mocking. You shove the cube into your mouth and chew, and instantly regret every single decision you have ever made in your entire life. The taste is not a taste, it's a sensation. It's like licking a sweaty boot that's been soaking in cleaning fluid. Your eyes water, your throat clenches, your brain screams, but your body knows better. Swallow or die. You gulp it down with the dramatic flair of someone jumping into a frozen lake. The room erupts in laughter. Good, yes, Stellan says, completely deadpan. You cough and nod. Very fresh. You manage to croak. Fermented shark is more than just food. It's tradition. And in the Norse Arctic winter, tradition is half the reason people stay sane. It turns out the Vikings had a whole menu of preserved delicacies designed not for flavor, but for pure function. The Greenland shark, of course, couldn't be eaten fresh. It contains toxins that will wreck your nervous system. So instead, they learned to bury it in sand and gravel for several weeks to press the fluids out, and then hang it to dry and rot gently in the open air for several more months. Because, sure, why not? You're handed a cup of something to chase it down with. It's a bitter brew, more medicine than drink, made from herbs and roots, and possibly pure vengeance. It clears your sinuses and dulls the lingering pain in your throat. A woman named Aslaug pats you on the back. Now you are Viking, she says, smiling like you've just passed your final exam. You try to process what just happened, but the room is already moving on. More food appears. Dried fish, thin slices of cured lamb, pickled root vegetables, so sour they make your jaw ache. One of the children is happily chewing on a hunk of whale blubber like it's a fruit roll-up. No one complains. No one acts like any of this is strange, because it's not strange. It's necessary. That's when you realize that winter food isn't about pleasant flavor profiles. It's about survival, preservation, and calories. You don't cook for pleasure, you cook for fuel. Every dish is an answer to a problem. How do we keep this meat from rotting? How do we store fat through the dark months? How do we make something last when absolutely nothing grows? Stellan explains how they smoke meat over slow-burning fires with herbs, not for taste really, but to keep the flies away. How they salt fish until it's too dry to chew without soaking, but it never, ever spoils. How they pack butter in birch bark and store it underground until the spring. You think back to your own fridge, the labels, the expiration dates, the comforting security of knowing you can replace anything with a 5-minute trip to the store. Here, everything is irreplaceable. If you lose your food stores, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you don't last the winter. Here's your historical fact. Hakar, the infamous fermented shark dish, has its roots in pure necessity. The Greenland shark is toxic when fresh due to high levels of urea and trimethylamine oxide, but the Vikings learned how to neutralize these compounds by burying the meat and allowing it to ferment. It's still eaten in Iceland today, often served with a strong spirit called *Brennivin, nicknamed Black Death, to help it go down. Now, for the fringe fact, there's evidence that some Viking communities used fermented dairy cheese and even soured milk stored in animal stomach sacs, a form of portable protein. Some of it was so sour it was considered an appetite suppressant. Imagine carrying a bag of yogurt that could double as a weapon. That's Viking snacking. And tonight's scholarly debate: did the Norse develop these methods of fermentation and preservation independently, or did they borrow them through contact with the Celts, Slavs, and other cultures? While similar food preservation methods existed across ancient Europe, the Arctic versions pushed the boundaries, using volcanic vents, glacial caves, and salt marshes in incredibly creative ways. Some argue it was pure innovation, others call it sheer desperation. As you sit there with a stomach that's half numb and half afraid of what's coming next, you begin to appreciate the quiet resilience that's baked into every single bite, the willingness to eat what no one else would, the defiant creativity, the brutal efficiency. You might not want another cube of Hickarl ever again, but you respect the hell out of it. The fire dies down to glowing coals, casting the longhouse in a flickering amber haze. Around you, people yawn, stretch, and settle back into their fur nests. A few snores begin to echo in the quiet room. A goat wanders past, nudges your leg, and flops down beside you with a sigh. You pull your cloak tight and lie back, the taste of a ammonialist shark still lingering faintly on your breath. It's horrible, it's unforgettable, it's tradition. And somehow, in the middle of all this cold, all this dark, all this madness, you're starting to feel full. You've been warned ahead of time. Catil gives you a look, half serious, half gleeful, and says, "Tonight, you bathe." You think, okay, great. Finally, the smoke, the sweat, the ever-present temps of goat. Maybe now, you'll come out the other side, smelling less like a fur-lined chimney. But no one tells you what bathing actually means here, until you're already ankle-deep in snow, trudging toward what looks like a moss-covered mound at the very edge of the settlement. The door is small, barely wide enough to crawl through, and as you step inside, it's like entering another planet. A wave of thick, wet heat slams into your face, fogging your eyes and filling your lungs. The walls are made of stone, low and beaded with condensation. Steam rises from a wide, shallow pit in the center, where rocks, blackened and cracked, glow faintly red under a thin layer of water. A woman tosses another ladle of water onto them, and the room hisses like an angry serpent. This is the Badstofa, the Viking steam bath. There are no soaps, no lavender scrubs, just fire, rock, water, and sweat. You're handed a wooden ladle and pointed toward a rough-hewn bench. And then, in the most unceremonious way possible, people just start stripping down. Let's pause here for a moment. You've been mentally preparing to bathe, yes, but you are not prepared to be naked with a group of strangers in a steamy, subterranean cave while someone pours boiling water onto hot rocks 3 feet from your toes. But you realize very quickly that modesty is a luxury, one that people tend to drop when it's 0 degrees outside and frostbite is a real and present threat. This isn't a spa, it's a system, it's a rhythm. You shed your layers slowly, regretfully, and step onto the bench, gripping the wooden ladle like it's your only defense against the creeping vulnerability of your own unclothed self. Someone hands you a bundle of twigs, fresh birch branches tied together. Hit yourself, they say. Good for skin. You do it lightly at first, then more confidently. It feels absurd and oddly satisfying. Your skin prickles. Blood returns to places it hasn't visited in days. The steam fills your head. Your pores open up like blooming moss. Your lungs burn a little, but it's a welcome kind of burn. You haven't felt this clean since? Ever, actually. Not this kind of clean. Not earth clean. You're sweating out the soot, the smoke, and the strange, unspoken heaviness of the cold. And then Stellan stands up, nods, and says, "Time for cold." You don't ask what that means, because you already know, and your body is already screaming. Asterisk, no, asterisk. The exit is fast. The cold is faster. You burst through the low door, barefoot, wet, and steaming like a roast chicken. The snow hits your feet, then your legs, then your lungs. You stagger, you shout. You may or may not curse every Norse god you've ever heard of. And then you dive headfirst into a snowdrift, because apparently that's what you do after steaming your soul out of your body. Everything goes numb in about 2 seconds. Then it starts to tingle. Then you feel more alive than you ever have in your entire life. Your heart is pounding so hard it echoes in your ears. Your skin burns with the cold and the memory of heat and something that feels almost like joy. You look up at the sky, which is clear for once, the stars blinking down at you like distant cold fires, and you laugh. You don't mean to. It just escapes you, a bark of pure disbelief and exhilaration. This is the reset button. You go back inside the bathhouse, dripping and grinning, and rejoin the others on the benches. No one says anything. They just nod, as if to say, "Good, you didn't die." Later, wrapped in dry wool and curled back up near the longhouse fire, you sip hot broth while your skin still glows faintly from the ordeal. You're not clean in the modern sense. Your hair still feels like hay, and your nails still look like they've been in a fistfight with a shovel. But something deep inside you feels scrubbed, raw, rebalanced. Here's the historical fact for you. Norse bathhouses were real and widespread. Archaeological evidence from settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and even parts of Norway shows that these steam baths were a regular part of life, even in the coldest months. Some were built near natural geothermal springs. Others, like this one, were heated with fire-warmed stones. Cleanliness wasn't just practical, it was spiritual, ritualistic, and deeply social. And the quirky fact, in some Icelandic bathhouses, people left small offerings coins, carved bones, bundles of herbs around the stones, for luck or protection. Bathing wasn't just about hygiene. It was seen as a kind of purification ritual, a way to reconnect the body and spirit when the world outside was frozen over. And the open debate, how often did the Vikings really bathe? Some sagas suggest that once a week was standard, especially in Iceland, where geothermal energy made baths more accessible. Others argue it was far less frequent in mainland settlements due to the scarcity of firewood. Still, the mere existence of bathhouses in the dead of winter says something radical. Even when the world is buried in snow, people still made time to feel clean, to feel human. You lean back, the furs tucked around your shoulders, and let the warmth of the fire sink deep into your bones. Your body feels like it belongs to you again. The longhouse smells slightly less offensive now. Or maybe you're just numb to it. Either way, you understand why these people make the effort. Why, even when fuel is precious and time is short, they carve out a place to sweat and shiver and remember what warmth really feels like. Outside, the snow falls softly, slowly, like feathers from a sleeping sky. And inside, you feel new. You're still glowing faintly from the bathhouse incident when you realize something's shifting inside the longhouse. The usual rhythm, the murmured conversations, the low clatter of tools, the gentle coughing, and occasional goat noises changing. There's a buzz in the air now, a kind of static before a storm. Except, instead of lightning, it's celebration. People begin to move with a new purpose. Furs are shaken out and draped over the beams. Barrels of ale are rolled in from the cold. Stellan and Astrid are talking in hushed tones near the hearth, and someone is carefully cleaning the soot off a carved wooden idol of Thor that normally just lurks, unnoticed, in a dark corner. You're not sure what's happening, but it feels big, and as usual, no one is explaining it to you. So you ask Inga, who's stacking bundles of kindling with more focus than usual. She looks up, surprised, you have to ask. Midwinter's night, she says. Tonight, we honor the gods. You raise an eyebrow. You've been here long enough to know that honor can mean anything from a quiet prayer to an animal sacrifice, to dancing in your underwear in the snow. She sees the concern on your face and grins. There will be mead and songs and meat. Then her expression turns more serious. And we ask for survival. It hits you then. This isn't just a party. It's a plea. It's a ritual that has been carved into the frostbitten bones of this place. Because winter, no matter how well you prepare for it, is still a gamble. No one is immune. And tonight is the night they look up at the black, star-filled sky and ask the old gods, please, let us live until the spring. By late afternoon, though honestly, it still looks like midnight. The longhouse has been transformed. Animal hides have been draped over the rafters. The packed earth floor has been swept clean with bundles of birch twigs. The fire pit is roaring, hotter and brighter than usual, and someone has hung bundles of herbs and animal bones above it in strange, intricate patterns you don't recognize. You try asking what they mean. The answer is always the same: protection, maybe luck. You help hang a few things, mostly decorative. Bells made from bits of carved bone, small wooden animal carvings. It feels festive, yes, but also heavy with intent. Every item has a story. Every placement is deliberate. You feel like a guest at a dinner party that's being hosted by ancient ghosts. Then comes the food. You've been here long enough to know that the normal winter meals are humble, functional, calorie-dense affairs. Not tonight. Tonight, they bring out the asterisk, real asterisk food. Smoked lamb ribs, boiled grains, spiced with what you think is angelica root, a roast duck that was fattened during the last days of autumn, and yes, mead, the good kind, sweet and heady, and served in carved wooden cups that still bear the teeth marks of past self. You sit cross-legged on a fur between Inga and a teenager named Bjorn, who's already had too much mead and is slurring praises to Odin between gulps. Everyone eats with both hands. There's no shame, no delicate ceremony. Meat is torn from the bone. Broth is slurped loudly, and laughter breaks out in the middle of a chew. It's messy, loud, and deeply human. And beneath it all, there's a hum of tension you can't quite place. After the food comes the fire rituals. Someone dims the central flames down to glowing coals, and a horned man steps forward. Not horned in a costume way. He's wearing a literal horned cap made from the skull of some animal you don't want to meet. He's the asterisk, Gogi asterisk, a kind of priest. You'd seen him before, just another quiet villager. Now, in the flickering firelight, he seems older, bigger, darker. He begins to chant, not in song, not in speech, but something in between, low, rhythmic, ancient. Others join in slowly, their voices weaving together like threads in a frayed rope. They sing of Thor, who brings the storm, of Odin, who knows the cost of wisdom, of Freya, who brings the spring. Eventually, you don't know the words, but you feel the shape of them. Longing, respect, hope, and maybe even a little bit of fear. Then someone places a carved wooden bowl onto the coals, and a thick plume of scented smoke rises. It smells like resin, pine, dried herbs, and something sweetly sour. The smoke curls and twists, filling the air with a kind of thick, reverent silence. One by one, people toss offerings into the fire, small bones, bits of fur, silver trinkets, old coins, even pieces of food. You watch as Inga tosses in a beautifully carved comb. Stellan drops a small rock that's been wrapped in cloth. You ask him what it was. "A piece of my brother's grave," he says, like it's no big deal. They offer these things not as bribes, but as messages, as symbols, as reminders to the gods and, maybe to themselves, that they're still here, still waiting for the sun to return, still worthy of life. Here's your historical fact. Midwinter festivals were a very real and very important part of Norse culture, known in Old Norse as asterisk, Jolsel, from which we get the modern word Yule. These celebrations predated Christianity by centuries and involved feasting, ritual toasts, BLT, and honoring the gods for protection and good fortune in the coming year. Some customs included lighting a central fire or a large log to symbolize the eventual returning of the sun. Your quirky fact: in some Viking households, they carved sun wheels, circular wooden discs with spokes, and placed them near the hearth during these winter festivals to symbolically invite the sun back. They weren't just partying, they were pleading with the universe in the language of symbols and flame. And the debate. Some scholars argue that these rituals were deeply and sincerely religious. Others think they were mostly psychological structured distractions designed to break up the bleak, soul-crushing monotony of the Arctic darkness. But maybe both are true. Maybe when the night never ends, the line between faith and survival gets incredibly blurry. Later that night, as the fire burns low and the songs wind down into slow, sleepy hums, you sit in the thick, smoky warmth of the longhouse and feel something you didn't expect to feel. Awe, not of the gods, necessarily, but of the people, their endurance, their creativity, their stubborn insistence on joy, even when the world outside is nothing but ice and shadow. You fall asleep with a full stomach, your ears still ringing with song, the smell of pine smoke still in your nose. You dream of fire and snow, of gods in furs, of a spring that is struggling to be born through a frozen, indifferent sky. And for the first time, maybe you actually believe it'll come. The next few days bleed together. One long, slow blur of frost and smoke and empty hours. There's a strange rhythm to Viking winter life once you settle into it, a kind of low gear of existence that hums just loud enough to keep your mind busy, but not so fast that time has any real meaning. Days don't feel like days. They feel like long stretches of in-between. You wake up, you do something that vaguely resembles work. You eat a bowl of something bland and warm, and you go back to the same sleeping furs before your mind has time to question the point of it all. What do people do all day when they can't leave the house without risking their nostrils freezing shut? You find out the answer pretty quickly. They make things constantly. Every idle hand in the longhouse becomes a tool. They are whittling, carving, sewing, weaving, braiding rope, fixing shoes, mending clothing, sharpening blades, repairing tool handles, patching sails, anything that keeps the hands moving and the brain from chewing on itself. You sit beside Inga one morning as she repairs a cloak. Her fingers move automatically, stitching through the thick, coarse wool with a curved needle made of bone. The dim light from the fire hits the thread just enough to make it glint like fine wire. She doesn't look down once. You ask her how long it took her to learn to sew like that. She shrugs. Before I could walk, I think. Then she smirks. Winter has always been school. Nearby, Bjorn is carving a small fish out of a piece of driftwood. It doesn't serve a purpose, at least not a practical one, but his hands are busy, his eyes are focused, and his quiet humming keeps the heavy silence from swallowing the room. Someone is weaving cordage in the corner. Another is braiding her daughter's hair, not out of vanity, but because it keeps it from freezing into solid knots later on. You try your hand at a few things. They hand you a cracked wooden spoon to sand smooth with a rough stone, then a length of raw wool to twist into thread. Your fingers cramp up fast. Your patience fails even faster. But it's not about speed, it's about continuity. It's about moving, making, repeating. The tools here aren't just physical, they're mental. Without them, the winter becomes a trap. The children are just as busy. When they're not sent outside to run laps in the snow for warmth, or to check on the goats, or fetch more water, they're taught to work. Tiny needles for tiny hands. Carving practice with dull blades. Even the toys they play with become lessons. A wooden horse teaches them to carve. A small doll teaches them to sew. Even the games they play involve strategy, counting, and patience. The longhouse is their school, their world, and their shelter, all rolled into one. And the boredom. Oh, it's real. You can see it in the shifting, restless eyes of the teenagers, the long sighs between tasks, the way a few people stare deep into the fire, like they're trying to remember what sunlight looked like. One man, older and sharpened, tells you flat out, the dark doesn't kill you, the waiting does. That's when the stories start. It's late. The fire has sunk down into glowing, smoldering embers. The wind howls outside like a thing made of teeth, and Stellan, half drunk on mead and meat, begins to speak. He tells a story of Loki, the trickster god, who once cut off a goddess's hair just to see what would happen, of Thor smashing mountains with his hammer, of a giant who drank the entire sea and thought it was just a big mug of ale. The kids gather close, their eyes wide in the firelight, their bodies huddled together like nesting dolls under a shared pile of furs. The adults listen to, smiling, muttering corrections, adding sound effects, and debating the small details. The longhouse becomes something else in those moments. It's not just a shelter anymore. It's a theater, a temple, a time machine. You don't need sunlight when you've got stories like this. They stretch across hours, across centuries. They're alive, passed from hand to mouth, from parent to child, like a precious, flickering fire. And you just listen, your eyes half closed, your brain softening like snow under warm boots. You get it now. Why the myths matter. Why voices need to fill the dark, not to push it away, but to make it feel full instead of empty. Here's your historical fact. In Viking society, winters were seen as the prime time for storytelling and passing on oral traditions. With so much of their culture being unwritten, these long, dark months were when the great sagas were shared, remembered, embellished, and passed down to the next generation. The skalds, who were professional poets, held a special and honored place in Norse communities, preserving not just entertainment, but also history, law, and important moral lessons through their verse. Now, for the fringe detail, there's some evidence that narrative games were played during these long nights. They were structured, competitive storytelling sessions, where one person would begin a tale, and others would have to continue it, one by one, without breaking the logic or the tone. If you lost the thread, you lost the game. In some households, the losers had to do the worst chores for a week. So, yes, winter boredom led directly to the invention of improv sagas. And tonight's scholarly debate: were these indoor months truly a time of creativity and bonding? Or was that a luxury only for the well-fed? Some historians argue that, for the poor, winter was a living hell, crowded, unsanitary, and filled with tension and illness. Others suggest that this very hardship bred a stronger social cohesion, and that the stories, songs, and shared tasks were precisely how people avoided breaking under the immense pressure. Probably both are true, depending on how well your salted fish stash was holding out. You lie down again, this time beneath a heavier fur than usual. Your fingers are sore from whittling. Your ears are still ringing with the last tale Stellan told, the one where a man marries a bear who was disguised as a woman and wakes up with frostbite and a lot of regrets. As the fire dies, the longhouse breathes its slow, smoky breath. You close your eyes. There's no light outside, no noise but the wind and the faint creak of wood settling into the frost. But inside, the silence isn't empty. It's full of stories. You've given up on knowing what day it is. Even the very idea of morning and evening has melted into this long, dreamlike smear of dim light and darker dark, broken only by meals and chores, and the occasional accidental nap that turns into a full night's sleep. Without clocks, without consistent sunlight, without anything that screams structure, time here flows more like smoke, slow, curling, and impossible to grasp. You try asking Catil what day it is. He just shrugs and says, "One closer to spring," which is both comforting and horrifying at the same time. You're not the only one struggling with it. Around the fire, you notice people drifting in and out of tasks, like they're walking through molasses. Someone is carving the same spoon for the third time this week. Another woman keeps rechecking the same fishing net for holes that were never there. Even the goats look confused, bleating at odd hours and eating snow like it had personally offended them. And then there's the light, or the lack of it. Today, you get a rare glimpse of something that could almost be called sun for about 30 minutes around what might be midday. The sky turns a soft, silvery color, not bright, but less dark. Shadows return briefly, stretching long and blue across the snow. A few people step outside just to stand in it, as if it were warmth itself. You do, too. You turn your face upward, close your eyes, and feel, well, not heat exactly, but a presence, proof that the sun still exists, that it still cares, just a little. And then it's gone again, like someone flicked off the main switch and left you in the cold. That's when you learn about timekeeping the Viking way. Forget sundials. they're useless here for months. Forget hourglasses. No one has the luxury of wasting sand. Out here, time is marked by routine, by tasks, by subtle changes in the temperature, by hunger, or by the way the smoke moves through the longhouse. Astrid shows you her method. She keeps a thick knot of braided cord by her bed, with small, carved beads woven into it at intervals. Each bead, she explains, is for a task or a prayer. She touches one, firewood, another, animals, another, evening meal. It's not a clock, it's a rhythm. She doesn't count hours, she counts the world around her. Others mark time in different ways. One man tracks the wax drips on a single, precious candle. A woman places a row of small stones near the hearth and moves one slightly after each completed chore. A boy scratches tally marks into the beam near his bed. He's at 25 and counting, though he started drawing little animals between them out of either boredom or madness. You ask how they know when it's time to do anything. The answer is always the same. We just know. You don't. At least, not yet. Your internal clock is completely fried. You're tired when you wake up and wide awake when everyone else is sleeping. Your body craves the bright, scheduled world. It came from alarms, deadlines, daylight. But slowly, painfully, you're learning to trust something older. Your stomach becomes a clock. Your fingers, sore from use, tell you when it's time to rest. The rhythm of the chores, feeding the animals, of stoking the firewall of it, becomes a kind of pulse. It's not mechanical, it's biological. And you start to notice that in the quiet of the longhouse, time feels different. Slower, yes, but also more present. When there's no rush, no bells or dings or calendar alerts, you begin to feel each moment instead of just racing through it to get to the next one. You spend a long afternoon, or maybe it's morning, helping Inga dye wool with lichens and ashes. The process is slow and quiet. Mix, stir, wait, let the fibers soak, pull them out, hang them up, wait again. No one rushes. No one even talks much, but the work gets done. Time moves, not in ticks, but in tides. Later, you sit by the fire and just carve lines into a block of wood, your own calendar, maybe, or just a piece of something that feels like sanity. You don't know what day it is. You don't even know if it matters anymore. But for the first time, you're not counting down to something. You're just counting. Here's your historical fact. Viking societies didn't have mechanical clocks. Instead, they used natural time markers, sunlight when available, moon cycles, seasonal shifts, and communal routines. Some used primitive sundials in the warmer months called *SL, skuggafjell, el sin, literally sun-shadow-board. But in the winter, such tools were useless, and time became more of a social construct than a mechanical one. Now for the quirky bit. There's evidence that some Norse households used time lamps, oil lamps, with marked reservoirs, or tied cords to indicate how long they had burned. It was a kind of candle clock without the clock. One archaeologist even suggested that certain carved bones with dots may have been personal timekeepers' literal bone calendars. And the scholarly debate, was Viking timekeeping structured, or was it purely improvisational? Some experts argue that their rituals and traditions offered more consistency than modern timekeeping ever could. Others believe that the chaos of the Arctic winters led to significant mental strain and social disorganization. Was the Norse mind adaptable, or was it simply numb? You sit by the fire long after the others have gone to sleep. The dim glow of the embers casts warped, dancing shadows up the soot-blackened beams. You stare at the embers and wonder how long it's been since you last saw a clock, a calendar, anything with numbers on it. And then you realize you don't really miss them. Here, time isn't something you track, it's something you inhabit. You pull your furs tighter, stretch out on the sleeping platform, and close your eyes. Somewhere in the back of your mind, the modern world still ticks and talks away, but it's distant now, faint like a voice down a long tunnel. And here, in the dark, your own heartbeat is enough. You can't help but laugh the first time you see it. Two kids are sliding full speed down a snow-covered hill on a flat, polished piece of bone. One of them is screaming with pure, unadulterated joy. The other one looks like he's preparing for an honorable death, and neither has any intention of stopping before they slam directly into the pile of firewood at the bottom of the hill, which they do with a satisfying crunch. And then they both roll over, laugh hysterically, and start dragging their bone sled back up the hill for another go. This isn't what you expected from a Viking childhood in the Arctic. You pictured something more solemn, more grim, children solemnly sharpening knives by the firelight, or carrying buckets of goat urine through massive snowdrifts, not wiping snot off their faces with their mittens and hurtling themselves into solid wood like tiny, fearless lunatics. And yet, here they are, making the winter their playground. Astrid sees you watching and smirks. Better they break an arm now than their necks later. And that's the entire Viking parenting philosophy in one concise sentence. It turns out that yes, Viking kids worked hard. They carried water, they helped mend clothing, they fed the animals, they scraped hides, they prepared meals, and they tended to their younger siblings while their parents prepared for the next potential disaster. But they also played, not with toys like you know them, but with whatever was around: carved sticks, bone dice, bits of driftwood, and apparently the laws of physics. You join a group of children who are building a snow fort. It's not just for fun. They're preparing for a massive snowball battle with another group from across the longhouse. You try to help build a wall, only to get ambushed by 3 kids with surprisingly well-packed and accurate projectiles. The snow stings your face. Your dignity takes a significant hit, but you're laughing before you can even catch your breath. Inside the longhouse, there's less chaos, but just as much creativity. A girl is carefully carving runes into a strip of birch bark. Another boy is twisting goat sinew into string, his tongue sticking out in concentration. They chatter in bursts of Old Norse, but even without understanding the words, you catch the rhythm. Jokes, dares, dramatic retellings of things that happened 5 minutes ago. They aren't just surviving the winter, they're growing up in it. You ask Inga what it's like raising children in these long, cold months. She doesn't hesitate. They get stronger, or they don't. Winter teaches fast. It sounds brutal, but you realize it's not cruel. There's no room here for a softness that doesn't serve a purpose. There's no helicopter parenting, no hand-wringing over scraped knees. A child who learns how to keep themselves warm, who to trust, and how to find dry firewood. That's a child who might just live to see the thaw. Later, you watch a small boy, maybe 5 years old, dragging a piece of meat across the floor, muttering instructions to a dog that clearly outranks him socially. He's not being coddled or corrected, just watched, observed, and allowed to either fail or succeed on his own terms. And somehow, he does. You remember something Astrid said earlier. We don't raise children. We prepare them. There's a difference, and it runs deep here. In the Arctic, your childhood isn't an escape from responsibility. It's the slow, painful, and joyful process of learning how not to die. And yet, it's not all rough edges and stern discipline. At night, when the chores are done and the wind howls outside like a hungry beast, the kids gather close to their parents and curl up into shared nests of fur and warmth. You see a mother gently combing lice from her daughter's hair, singing a low, haunting lullaby that makes your chest ache even though you don't know the words. A father carves a little wooden figure for his son and hands it over like it's a piece of treasure. These aren't moments of luxury, they're survival mechanisms made tender. Because winter doesn't just freeze the world, it presses in, day after day, shrinking your entire life down to a few square meters and the people inside them. And in that intense closeness, even the smallest gestures become massive. A shared joke, a warm hand, a new pair of socks. Here's your historical fact. Viking children, especially in rural settlements, were expected to begin contributing to household survival from as young as 4 or 5 years old. Tasks were assigned based on their strength and maturity, and their play often mirrored adult responsibilities. Still, play was essential, not just for joy, but for learning. Archaeological finds include carved animals, toy swords, sleds, and simple musical instruments, all likely made for or by children. The quirky fact: Norse sagas often include child prodigies, tiny warriors, wise little girls, kids who outwit adults with their clever tricks. Whether this was myth or a mirror of reality, these tales suggest that even the youngest were valued not just as future adults, but as full members of the community. One story even tells of a boy who killed a wolf with a sharpened spoon. Is it true? Who knows? But it feels true. And the scholarly debate, some historians argue that a Viking childhood was short, harsh, and mostly devoid of affection. Others suggest that while discipline was firm, children were deeply loved and integrated into family life in ways that modern societies might envy. Without institutions like schools or daycare, kids spent nearly every waking hour with their extended families, and that constant closeness shaped them. By the time evening comes, the kids are spent. You watch one little girl, maybe 7, curl up next to her grandmother, pulling a blanket of sheepskin over both of them. Another boy crawls under a bench with the dog and immediately starts snoring. Even the resident goat seems too tired to bother them. You settle into your own fur pile, watching the flicker of the firelight dance across the soot-streaked beams, and realize how differently you're starting to see this longhouse. It's not just a smoky bunker full of tough, stoic survivors. It's a living thing, filled with love, and arguments, and children with wet boots and chapped lips who will someday grow into the people leading rituals, telling stories, building houses, and maybe, just maybe, making it through a few more winters. Because here, childhood isn't sheltered from the cold. It grows right through it. You can't ignore it anymore. The smell, not the smoky, woolen people musk that clings to your clothes, or even the faint undertone of fermented shark that still lingers from the last feast. No, this one is sharper, earthier, more animal. And it's been intensifying with every passing day until finally, with a subtle but undeniable shift in your surroundings, you realize the truth. Half the longhouse is not for people, it's for animals. You knew this intellectually, of course. You'd seen the goats wandering around, had your feet stepped on by a sheep or two. But now, it sinks in fully. The longhouse isn't divided into separate rooms. It's a dual-purpose machine. On one end, human survival. On the other end, livestock survival. And the line between those two is blurred by sheer necessity. You decide to venture over into their side. The moment you cross the invisible boundary marked only by a slightly lower beam and a not-so-subtle drop in floor. Cleanliness, the air thickens. It's warmer over here, surprisingly, and more humid. It smells like straw, manure, damp fur, and something like sour milk in a wet boot. The goats stare at you with their judgmental, rectangular eyes. The sheep just chew endlessly. In the corner, 2 cows lie curled together, enormous and peaceful, steam rising from their bodies, as if they're their own personal central heating units. Catil, who is elbow deep in what appears to be cow maintenance, waves you over. "Careful where you step," he mutters. The floor bites. You look down. Slippery straw hoof prints, and something that squishes uncomfortably under your boot. He wasn't joking. "This is where the real heat is," he says, patting one of the cows on its massive side. "They're better than a fire," and he's right. The animal room, this muddy, living barn, is several degrees warmer than the rest of the longhouse. It's not cozy, exactly, but it's unmistakably alive. The collective body heat from a dozen large animals trapped inside an earthen building that's biomass at work. The Vikings might not have invented central heating, but they did find a way to snuggle with it. You sit on an overturned bucket, trying not to breathe too deeply, and watch Catil milk one of the cows. The milk is warm, steaming in the cold air. He hands you a wooden cup filled to the brim. You sniff it. It's fresh milk, unpasteurized, probably crawling with more bacteria than a city sewer. You drink it anyway. It tastes shockingly rich, and you suddenly understand why this liquid gold was so carefully guarded through the long winter months. These animals weren't just warmth or potential food. They were status. They were protection. They were even a kind of spiritual presence. Every single one of them represented a massive investment of effort, foresight, and a bet on survival. If a cow died midwinter, it wasn't just sad, it was catastrophic. You learn that the animals are brought inside during the late autumn, and they stay here until the spring thaw. Yes, they poop inside. Yes, they sometimes panic, or escape, or give birth in the middle of the night, while someone is trying to sleep 20 feet away. But they are part of the household now, part of the team. No one here lives asterisk above asterisk their animals. They live asterisk with asterisk them. It's humbling. You're sharing this survival space, not just with people, but with creatures who give you milk, wool, meat, and warmth. It's not glamorous work, but it's oddly satisfying. You're learning that survival isn't just about fire and fur. It's about maintenance, and animals need a lot of it. Still, it's not without its challenges. Disease can spread like wildfire in these tight, enclosed quarters. One cough from a sick goat can turn into a full-blown crisis. Food must be carefully rationed, not just for the people, but for every single beast inside. And water, always cold, always scarce, has to be hauled bucket by bucket from a frozen stream, often requiring you to chop through several inches of ice first. There are no days off. Here's your historical fact. Viking longhouses were very often shared spaces, with animals and humans cohabiting throughout the winter. The layout varied, but many houses had the animals occupying up to 1/3 of the total structure, usually at the lower downslope end for better drainage. Archaeological evidence from Norse farms in Iceland and Greenland clearly shows these partitioned yet connected spaces for livestock. which was essential for maintaining warmth and crucial food supplies during the months when going outside was dangerous. Now, for the quirky detail. In some Icelandic households, people actually slept above the livestock area, on elevated platforms or lofts, not for safety, though that was a nice bonus, but for the warmth. The rising body heat from the cows below made those sleeping platforms the warmest spots in the entire building. You might call it the original heated floors, just with more mooing. And the scholarly debate. Some argue that this cohabitation was a clever, intentional solution to the problems of cold and scarcity. Others think it was a desperation tactic, the last resort of those with too few resources to build separate barns for their animals. But modern reconstructions suggest it was a conscious design choice, a kind of ecological heating system with a built-in breakfast. That night, as you settle into your now familiar sleeping furs, you find yourself closer to the animal wall than usual. You can hear them breathing, shifting, sighing in the dark. The low living sounds are oddly comforting. The goat even bleats once, as if to check that you're still there. You are. And for once, you don't even mind the smell. It begins with a cough, a single rasping hack in the darkness that echoes louder than it should. Then another, from someone on the far end of the longhouse. A child sniffles. Someone sneezes hard enough to wake a chicken. You sit up slowly, rubbing the crust of smoke and sleep from your eyes. It's colder than usual in here, the air heavy and sour. Your own throat burns illness. It moves like fog in these tight, enclosed quarters, quiet, creeping, and impossible to keep out. And once it arrives, you realize just how vulnerable these Vikings were. Even wrapped in their furs and seasoned by the relentless cold, they could outsmart the weather and outlast the hunger. But sickness didn't play by the rules. By morning, 3 people are coughing hard. Astrid makes the call. The sick must be separated, not outside, of course. That would be a death sentence. Instead, they're moved to the least trafficked end of the longhouse, behind a row of crates and furs that have been hung like makeshift curtains. You help string them up, your fingers stiff with the cold, your breath visible in the air. It doesn't feel like protection. It feels like a quiet surrender. The infected are wrapped in extra layers, given warm broth, and treated with foul-smelling onion poultices that smell even worse than the goat pen. You ask Inga what's in the mixture, and she just shrugs. Moss, bile, root. It worked on my sister once. That seems to be the logic behind most of their remedies. Anecdotal evidence, mixed with a heavy dose of blind optimism and a pinch of ritual. One of the men lies on his side, shivering violently under a fur pelt, sweat glistening on his brow despite the frigid air. You help hold his head while someone trickles a spoonful of honey-sweetened water into his mouth. For the lungs, they say. Another person brings over a paste made of dried, crushed mushrooms. You don't ask what kind. Some cures don't come with explanations. There's no doctor here, no medicine cabinet, no thermometer to tell you just how bad it is. There is only the knowledge that has been passed down from mothers and grandmothers, which herbs to use, what bark to chew, what prayers to whisper when the fever spikes. Healing here isn't sterile or scientific. It's messy, desperate, and deeply spiritual. You start noticing the signs of this effort everywhere. Dried bundles of yarrow and thyme are hanging from the beams. Bark is stored in small clay jars. Charcoal has been ground up and mixed with fat for poultices. The healers, usually the women, though not always, work constantly. Not just when someone is sick, But long before, every herb that was picked in the summer, every root that was stored, is part of this winter defense. And yet, even with all that effort, the longhouse feels deeply vulnerable now. The air carries the weight of uncertainty. People move slower, quieter. Conversations drop into whispers. When someone coughs too hard, all eyes flick toward them, like wolves watching a limping deer. You begin to understand why some Viking graves contain so few old bones. It's not because they didn't honor their elders, but because not everyone made it that far. The winters were long, and illness was relentless. There was no modern immune system cushioned by antibiotics and annual checkups. You got sick, and you either recovered or you didn't. It was as simple and as brutal as that. To pass the time and to avoid breathing in too deeply, you help grind dried plants into a fine powder. It's a strange blend of moss, dried berries, pine resin, and something that smells like tree bark and regret. You help brew it into a bitter tea. It makes your tongue go slightly numb, but everyone drinks it. That night, there's another ritual. Not a big feast like midwinter's, but a small, quiet ceremony near the fire. Stellan speaks words in a low voice you can't understand, touching a small, carved talisman to the forehead of each of the sick people. Inga sprinkles ash in a circle around their bedding. You don't ask if it's meant to keep the spirits out or the sickness in. Maybe both. Here's your historical fact. The Vikings didn't have a formal medical system, but they did have *Elsinar*, or healers, who used a complex mix of herbs, rituals, and practical experience to treat illness. Common treatments included teas made from yarrow, angelica, and juniper, salves made from animal fat mixed with charcoal, and, in rare cases, bloodletting. Fevers and respiratory illnesses were incredibly common in the winter due to the poor ventilation and close quarters. And the quirky fact, Viking cure charms were a real thing. Little runes or poems were carved into sticks, bones, or stones, and were believed to hold healing magic. Some were even meant to be swallowed or buried beneath the patient's bed. One particularly strange recipe involved boiling garlic in cow urine and applying it to wounds. It might have actually worked. Science is still deciding on that one. Now, for the scholarly debate. Were Viking medical practices mostly effective herbalism, or were they more akin to superstition? Some historians argue that their remedies were grounded in genuine, empirical knowledge that was passed down through generations and honed by necessity. Others say it was mostly symbolic, a way to comfort the sick and the dying when hope was slim. The truth probably lies somewhere in the overlap. By morning, one of the children is better. She's still coughing, but her eyes are brighter, and she asks for broth. A little flicker of hope moves through the longhouse, small but warm, like the fire itself. But another man, the one with the shaking hands and the fevered breath, has gotten worse. You hold his cup for him. You wipe his brow. You learn what care really looks like when all you have is a cloth and your own 2 hands. You lie awake that night, listening to the coughs from across the room, the steady, slow breathing of the animals, and the endless howl of the wind as it presses against the walls, like it's looking for a way to get in. And you realize you're not afraid of the cold anymore. You're afraid of what happens when the warmth finally runs out.